According to the team chat app Pumble, it revealed that workplace statistics showed that 86% of executives, employees, and employers believe that a lack of workplace communication and collaboration led to workplace failures in 2022, which naturally causes all of us to examine our leadership style and the messaging behind our leadership and whether we can get others to follow our lead. It is indeed an inexact science of a human experiment, making sure that what we are communicating is indeed resonating with those who we are intending to show the greatest path to prosperity through our leadership. Faith Wood is a conflict resolution specialist who focuses on improving the quality of your messages while also reducing unnecessary conflicts in order for you to strengthen relationships. Wood is a firm believer in the power of authentic connections and really meeting people where they are in their social development and helping them grow and giving them the tools necessary in order to succeed at the highest level of what they consider fulfillment. If you were to spend any length of time with Wood, you would quickly discover her passion for life and helping others maximize what their own potential is through cultivating their own systems of leadership, which gives them ownership over their own professional and personal story. I know I thoroughly enjoyed my time chatting with Wood all about effective leadership and messaging. So, without further delay, I'm excited to give you the tools of the trade when it comes to ensuring that your messaging is concise and packs a punch, which leaves a positive impact. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to talk to you all about relationships this afternoon. Great to see you, and thank you for a few minutes.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely. Now, Faith, I know that your work focuses on helping people improve the quality of their messages and reducing their unnecessary conflict. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about all the great work that you do.
You know, I spend an awful lot of time really thinking about how we underestimate the value of our influence. If you could just think about the people that you hang out with, you know, those individuals that surround you, the 5 people you spend the most time with, you know, do they light you up? Do they inspire you? Or do they make you more of a critic, negative thinking, start to be pessimistic and distrusting of people? And so even when we're not intentionally looking at how we communicate, we're always communicating. So a lot of the work that I've been doing is really taking a look at the impact of those communications, those relationships, and how they serve us. So a lot of my work is done with government or service-based industries. And so if you're kind of having customers coming in, or you're having to do build teams around service delivery, then I help those teams stay on point so that they're not fighting amongst themselves, creating unnecessary stress, feeling like there's disrespect in the workplace, or a lack of civility that seems to be, I don't know, all around us since COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Faith, I'm also curious to ask you about cultivating positive relationships. And what do you think the key is there?
When you talk about cultivating a positive relationship, I think we need to really think about bringing our best selves to the day. We get along with people so much better when we like them. So really taking the time to get to know somebody improves everybody's quality in the relationship. Really being curious about people and being interested in who they are and what they believe and what they're fascinated by. And if we spend time building those relationships and really developing them, I think our work days would be easier. Our quality of our relationships, the quality of our life would feel more powerful, more vibrant, more alive. And I think COVID really taught us a little bit of that, where we locked everybody down and we asked everyone to stay home. We're tribal by nature. So we need to be around people, and we need those connections to have our lives feel really fulfilled. And so when we're in isolation, it amps up our stress level, it amps up our insecurities, it makes us feel lonely and kind of like we're traveling this path by ourselves. But when we're surrounded by people who enrich our lives, who we connect with deeply and powerfully, when we feel like we have the support, we feel psychologically safer. And so, a lot of times at work, our biggest goal is to create psychological safety for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Faith, I'm going to share just a little bit about myself. I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia, cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen to walk normally. And, outside of hosting this podcast, I also work with businesses to amplify the hiring of folks with disabilities. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you look at the term workplace inclusion and equality for all?
I think when it goes back to that piece around curiosity and really staying focused on what we're attempting to accomplish. I think a lot of times when we have these, what we perceive to be biases or levels of discomfort around diversity and inclusiveness, when people feel like an organization isn't being inclusive, it's because they don't feel heard, they don't feel safe, they don't feel encouraged, they don't feel supported. And so they start to have a perspective that there is a lack of something. We all have scripts inside our head, expectations about how things will go. And I think when we're talking about individuals with disability, sometimes it's our first impression. Somebody says, well, how can this person contribute? Which is a natural bias. And yet, if we took the time to get to know individuals, we'd see their individual strengths, talents, the quality of the work that they're able to produce, the diversity that enriches our lives and makes us feel more open, more flexible, more supported, and to really start to feel like there's an opportunity to create a cohesive team environment where everybody is rowing towards the same goal. And I think what happens is people start to think one person is standing in the way of progress. Somebody's standing in the way of them getting a promotion. Somebody's standing in the way of them being noticed. And we all have a desire for attention. All of us have a desire for contribution, a chance to feel like we're making a difference. And I think that when we talk about diversity, it's about having multifaceted people in our workspaces that allow us to enrich the quality of our lives and expand the way that we're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm sure that I don't need to tell you that it's also important for people to take ownership of the space of the spaces that they believe that they belong in. So talk to me about taking personal ownership of your own relationship and sort of cultivating that space that you want to be seen into.
I think that goes back to living our best lives. I teach, I have a keynote that I use all the time called "You on Your Best Day Every Day." And so if we understood that we're influencing the way people think, the way they emotionally respond, the way that they feel when they come in contact with us, we have to be mindful all the time of being responsible for how we show up, how we contribute. And a lot of times I find that individuals are waiting to be approached. But if we're not stepping into the relationship, we're not enhancing the relationship either. And, we need to really be thinking about our nonverbals, our verbals, the patterns, the thoughts we have, whether we're rolling our eyes, the way that we speak, what our face is expressing. All of those things contribute to whether somebody feels like they're being appreciated, accepted, acknowledged, or not. And influence really comes down to three moves: attention, affiliation, and approach, and they happen in order. So what are we paying attention to? Are we paying attention to the differences or the similarities? Are we augmenting strengths, or are we making excuses and assigning blame? I think personal accountability is your responsibility for being prepared to be in a space, being prepared to show up. I remember when I first went into business for myself nearly 20 years ago, I was going to these network meetings, and I remember thinking in my head all the time, I really hate network meetings. I feel like I have to have these very superficial conversations with people. And then I was driving home one day realizing that attitude, that mindset was actually compromising my ability to be connected to others. So I changed it. I started driving to these network meetings and saying, I'm going to meet the most fascinating person in the room tonight. And you know what? I did. I met incredibly fascinating people, but I was more open. I took responsibility for setting the stage, for being more present, for being more likable, for presenting myself in a way that was my responsibility. It's not other people's responsibility to drag you in. It's our responsibility to lean in and to show up in a way that we want to be remembered, the way that we want to be received. And if we all did that, our stress levels would naturally, organically reduce, and so would our conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Vince, I know it's important for you to bring your authentic self to every conversation that you have with people, whether you work with them or whether you see them organically on the street. So tell me about bringing authenticity to everything that you do personally as well.
It's so interesting. Authenticity has become a real buzzword, hasn't it? And
it certainly has. Yeah.
Right? What does it mean to be authentic? And I think sometimes that in itself, those kind of phrases start to make people uncomfortable. They start to think, what is my authentic self? What does make me authentic? And I think that comes down to, how do you want to be received? Like, what's important to you? So in my business, whether I'm just going through an airport, or whether I'm meeting somebody in a restaurant, or I have a waitress, I'm kind first. I want to be seen as a giver. So I will give information freely and openly before I will start asking for an exchange. But I also want to be treated fairly. So I treat others fairly first. I set that model, and I make an intention every single day about how I want to participate, how I want to show up. That's not to say I do it right every time. Honestly, I think we all have our own intelligence. Everyone's fighting a battle of some kind. And there's always something to learn from those around us. And sometimes, you know what? I'm on top of my game. Sometimes I'm a rock star, but then other times I feel like an idiot. And that's okay too, because those are all part of our authentic self. And as long as we maintain that level of humility and generosity of spirit, and we speak from a place of, being honest and open and assuming good intent versus assuming judgment and harshness and bitterness. If we can realize that when people are short-tempered with us, or whether they're being, exploding, which we've seen a lot more of in the, this aftermath of the pandemic shutdown, the people's fear levels are really high. Their stress levels are really high. So bringing your authentic self is about recognizing that we're all human and that we're all in this space doing the very best we can. And when somebody explodes, are you willing to give them the generosity of recovery, a space to correct that disrespectful kind of conversation? Because, there's times when I snap, when I'm tired, when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm busy. And so forgiving people in that moment is equally as important as being authentic in that moment. And I think that we just need to lead from the place of what's important and what our highest values are. And if I value people, I need to show up for people. And that includes on their good days and their bad days. And I need to show up for me on my good days and my bad days, and not should all over myself or have really deep critical conversations with myself that limit my potential.
Yeah, and to that point, Faith, no one's perfect. And, we all have sort of our sort of crutches in life that we tend to go back to when we're afraid to sort of get out of our own comfort zone. So I'm wondering if you can speak to the difference between following through the pitfalls in life and not being afraid to come out of a comfort zone, because sometimes they can be interconnected and sometimes they can't. So I'm just wondering your perspective on that as well.
It's such a great question. I think that stretch goals are so good for us. They're good for our brain. They're good for our ability to function. And if anyone that's listening has ever followed neuroplasticity, it's the fastest growing element in healthcare research these days. And they're really looking at how do we keep our brain vibrant and alive? And I think our personalities are very much connected in that. But thinking about how do we stretch? How do we do things that scare us, but don't compromise us? It's the problem isn't failing. We're standing close to the edge of a big cliff. We're not afraid. People get all nervous standing on the edge, but the reality is we're more afraid of the falling. But if we're falling, we're more afraid of the landing. And we need to start to think about what's holding us back in terms of really going for the things that stretch us, that build character and develop us. And we can do that in very small ways. Every 6 months, we can do something that really stretches our expectation. We can do something we've never done before. We can do something that scares us. During COVID, people were feeling really isolated, and there was this whole group of people who started to learn technology, who started to learn Zoom, who started to learn how to use an iPad. And my grandmother, who turned 100 during COVID, she was one of them. She began this whole process of learning how to use an iPad so she could stay connected to people. And I just think it's absolutely phenomenal that if somebody in their, who's turning 100 can spend time stretching their expectation, the rest of us can do it as well. We have that ability within us. But maybe you want to learn a language, or maybe you want to take a dance class, or maybe you just want to do something that you've never done before. I took up paint by number. It seems like a really small thing, but during COVID, it was a really great way to get centered, to focus, and more importantly, I started paint by number, but then because I'm a people person, I included family members that lived elsewhere that were also in lockdown. And we were all doing paint by number together on Zoom chats. And then we invited friends and colleagues, and it became this really great social event. So just because there's something that's being imposed upon you that's around compliance and community mindedness, it doesn't mean that we can't find another way to stretch our expectations. And so I think that there's always this little bit of a dance around healthy boundary setting and healthy stretch goal setting. So what do you need to do so you get comfortable with change? You get comfortable doing something that scares you. You recognize you won't die. You know, as a professional speaker, I've had lots of people say, I could never do what you do. And I say, that's just because you've never done it. You know, you would be just as capable of standing up and sharing something you knew a lot about. But if you tried to get up and speak about something you didn't know anything about, you'd be a lot more uncomfortable. So, you know, really getting to know the ins and outs of our own intelligence, our own certainty can stretch that comfort zone in a way that's really meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a sign in my office, and there's a sort of motto that I live my life by. And, you know, I always tell myself the day I stop learning is the day that I die, because, you know, there's always, no matter how smart I am or how old I get, I can always learn something from somebody else, right? Because it's always an opportunity to grow, isn't it?
It is 100%. I mean, there were people that camped out watching Netflix, but great. As long as they were learning something, I'm proud of them. I studied neuroplasticity and took courses and watched documentaries. What a great opportunity. But we need to be growing all the time. You know, the world is moving so fast, and things that we knew yesterday are changing just as quickly and not as true anymore. And I think that we just need to be open to expanding and researching and being so thoughtful, so curious. It makes life fun to explore. You know, we're living a big adventure. Let's live it together.
Life is always an adventure. It's always a party, isn't it, Faith?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Faith, I know that one of your passions is also looking to solve problems and really diving into the way that people behave and sort of comport themselves. So I'm wondering why that's such an interest for you and why you're so passionate about it as well.
You know, I have a couple of reasons for why I'm so passionate about it. But if I were to look back, I could look back at my childhood. I've always been super fascinated by reading crime thrillers, paranormal books, and really wondering, you know, could I solve the crime? Could I solve the puzzle before the author finished the book? Could I understand why some ghosts come back and haunt us in the afterlife? And I think sometimes, if we think about it in a way, our stories and our experiences sometimes haunt us as well. So I have a background in healthcare and then law enforcement. And I found that often really rational people would do irrational things. And I really wondered what was creating that, you know, what was driving that response. And it really always came down to conflict, stress, and pressure, that when we got really emotional about something, became reactive instead of responsive. And if we could learn to control and influence the way that we think, our imagination, our perspective on a story, that we could actually start to have a much more meaningful influence over the way we respond to conflict, to friction, to pressure. And I started realizing that a lot of what was happening was that adrenaline surge in the body. And so I just began watching when was the moment that somebody started to have control over their thoughts again. You know, what shifted physiologically, what shifted emotionally, psychologically, that generated a more thoughtful interaction as opposed to a very defensive interaction. And there were such great things that came out of observing. And I call that observational communication. So observation-based communication. And now, after all of that work, working on the front lines of hostility and high pressure, I mean, I worked for the airlines and baggage claim. So I've always been a bit attracted to conflict at a high level. And just really starting to navigate it in a way that said, can I turn this situation around? Can I make it more high value? Can we have better conversations? If we shift a few things, and most of what I realized was that conflict is an inside out job, that we need to influence what's happening inside our own mind, our story we're telling ourselves about the interaction. And then we need to do a couple of physical things like, did you know that if you elevate your body, that you actually create dopamine and endorphins? In other words, I just have to lift my eyebrows and I will start to feel better. All I have to do is hold them for 20 seconds and I'll reduce that fear-based response just by raising the eyebrows for 20 seconds. It makes me more fascinated, more interested. And the minute I do that, it changes my tone of voice and the way I interact. And that in and of itself helped reduce the amount of friction that was being seen on the other side. And so, I'm kind of always the steward of what is going on, what makes people do that? And then taking what I'm learning and what I'm experiencing and practicing. So then I would get to deploy some techniques that I thought looked like they could work and soon realized, yes, that works, and it works 9 out of 10 times. So let's get that down on paper and start teaching it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Faith, I'm going to share just one other quick story with you. So the reason that I started this podcast was I was about to start a job, and then a week before I was to sign my contract, COVID hit, so my contract got suspended.
Right.
Oh, I had some time, so I started this podcast 2.5 years ago once the pandemic started. And the question that I have for you is about career pivoting and taking emotion out of a decision making, because I know you also work with people to help them adapt and taking emotion out of the decisions that they make. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on the career pivot and really how you work with people to make them understand when one door closes, the door to another opportunity opens.
I think that's such a big issue for so many people. And, COVID did the same thing to me. I had this very vibrant career. I had a lot of bookings for speaking gigs. They were all on the calendar. It was looking like it was going to be an awesome year. I was headed for Barcelona and I was going to speak in Portugal. I was really feeling on top of the world until March 15th. And March 15th, 2020, everything started canceling. And, they told us it would be 2 weeks. And you think, I can watch Netflix, eat cookies, kind of hang out for 2 weeks. It's like a forced mini vacation. But 2 weeks turned into 2 years. And I think that often, as we start to wonder, now what? I think a lot of people so what am I going to do now? And we often think of doing pros and cons lists. But pros and cons lists can really turn us into analysis paralysis pretty quickly. Because depending on emotionally how I feel about losing one thing or gaining something is so important. Often when people lose something, they have no idea what they want to do next. And so I encourage people to sit down and really think about, what have you always wanted to try? What have you always wanted to be? What have you always been interested in? So the podcast is a great example. You're a lifelong learner. You're interested in opportunities to learn from other people, to gain more insight, to grab more information. A podcast was a great natural extension. Learn how to run a podcast. Now, if you were somebody who's maybe a bit more fearful, you would have said, what do I know about podcasts? Which is what I did when I started writing books. I'd been writing lots of self-help books. That was a pretty easy thing. Information I teach from the stage, put them down on paper. Then I was in an airport in Chicago on a canceled flight, and I thought, I want to write a book that I want to read when I'm tired. And so I started writing nonfiction. But the first book that I wrote was painful. I had no idea what to even put down on paper. And as I started to think about how I could write a nonfiction book, or a fiction book, I started to think about what stories, what experiences I'd had that would contribute well to that style of writing. And I encourage my clients to do the same thing. What strengths do you already have? What insights do you already have? And how can they be leveraged in another way? So just because this door closed, there are plenty of other opportunities if we're open to them. If we start to see the expansion of our current talents, experiences. And when I'm talking to people about their resumes, I talk about transferable skills. So what is it that you already possess, are already interested in, already feel really powerful about? And how do you leverage that in new and creative ways? And a lot of that has to do with changing your physiology. Change your mind to change your spine. But like, if I want to change my mind, I change my spine. I stand up, I elevate, I lift my thumbs, I lift my toes, I lift my nose. And then I start to think about, what do I possess that's useful somewhere else, or that would be valuable somewhere else? If we get caught up in the doom and gloom, in the dismay and the despair, all the doors close. But if we sit back and say, that was a really fun run, how am I going to leverage what I already have in a new and powerful way? Now possibilities start to enter. So the idea is to activate that real endorphin-based thinking, and dopamine and endorphins happen when we're in an elevated way.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you brought up writing a book and writing your first book, I'm curious about the process of writing the book. You did a great job of telling me what was the book all about and the intended message, but I'm also curious to ask you about the process of writing the book, and what have you learned something about yourself that you didn't know before?
Oh, I learned so much about myself. And I think writing fiction is just such a powerful way to do it. It was such an extreme for me to go from speaking on stages to nurturing these stories. But one of the first things I learned was I speak in bullet points. And so I speak and teach in bullet points. And I learned that readers want character development. They don't want to make assumptions and leaps. They want to be led. So I had to learn to slow down. I had to learn to develop character traits and really start to expand on who people were. So my readers could fall in love with them. And I had to learn to speak that way so people would get excited about a story. Then I had to learn how to take that storytelling and turn it into 3 stories that happen inside the same book. So first one is, you've got a small story, kind of gets wrapped up in maybe 3 chapters, 5 chapters. And then you have a medium story, and that story might even end, let's say, before the end of the book, or maybe it ends 4 books later. How do you keep the thread of a story going so that people want to come back? And I learned that I am a very good procrastinator. So if I was just staring at a blank page, I could just set my material off to the side. I needed to be inspired to write. And so I also learned not to edit too early. There was a really great tip as a writer, is stop editing your material while you're writing it. I think it's a trap that a lot of us fall into, but I do it a lot even when I'm preparing for a presentation or a workshop, is editing the material before I get all the content down. So, one of the big things that I learned was put it all down and put it away, then look at it, format it later, figure out what pieces you want to keep and what you don't. I learned I like deadlines. I had to give myself artificial deadlines. If I didn't give myself an artificial deadline, I'm pretty sure the book would never get finished. It was just really easy to always keep adding to it. And, I had this idea in my head that if I was going to write a series, that a series should always end on an odd number. And I don't know where that came from, but in the end, my first series ends with 8 books instead of 5, instead of 3, instead of 7. So it's such an interesting way that you start to think about the world. And now I think I learned how many stories I actually have. To be able to get them down on paper, that whole process of writing, of just taking a sheet of paper and essentially writing down constantly all the things that are interesting, that you have a story wrapped around. And then how could you create an opportunity to tell it in some meaningful way that's real, that's raw, that's relevant. But, I think I learned I need help. I think that was the biggest thing that I learned as a writer, that we can't do everything for ourselves. And I think the same in life in general. There are some people that are just better at things. So in my business, I get an accountant. I don't want to know the numbers. I just want to do the work. And in my writing, I get an editor. She's much more ruthless than I am in terms of, carting out all the extra content. And she's really ruthless about making me add content in if I haven't met the objective. And the last piece is I learned the importance of having a tribe. Those people who give you the honest review before you launch a book. So sitting down and really having that magical group that reads the early writing, that has you in their best interests and can give you really dynamic feedback. And I think the same is true in whether you're writing a book or not, mastermind groups, having a group of people that have your best interests at heart, that help you be better, they inspire you to be better. And they push you harder than you'd ever push yourself. Because otherwise, we're probably all pretty good at procrastination.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to have a sense of community to hold yourself accountable, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Absolutely. And, Fraser, earlier I asked you about the concept of inclusion, but I also wanted to ask you about the concept of diversity and collaboration, and how do you think those two things are interconnected and can provide a competitive advantage as well?
A lot of people that teach conflict resolution say collaboration's the toughest one. And it is very tough. It's hard to get people moving towards one goal. But when we have diversity, and diversity of thoughts, diversity of ideas, diversity of personalities, we bring a level of insight that's unattainable anywhere else. Collaboration is about moving us towards the same goal. And I think what's often missing for people is understanding where we're going. But once you've got those people all contributing in a meaningful way to move us forward, diversity and collaboration can actually make your organization money. They will earn you dividends that you never even thought possible. And it goes back to what I was saying about writing. One person, one thought, one individual, having too many people with the same beliefs, the mini-me's in an organization, they're not helpful. If one person is all that's needed to make a decision, have one. Collaboration is about expanding and making sure that your message lands more powerfully, more emphatically, and solves more problems than it creates. And I think if there's only one contributing person or one contributing thought towards that outcome, we're willfully blind. There is this space where we miss all the reasons that we're going to struggle, or that in a book launch, the book isn't going to launch well if we're reliant on one person to put the launch out. Collaboration is about building a community where people feel supported, where they feel safe, and where we add a layer, an unexpected layer of value and magic that's unattainable in any other way. I mean, I was born a twin. I've been a collaborator from birth. So I know the magic of having somebody who wants the same things that you want moving forward as a team. And I have seen teams rise above all the noise and create some pretty powerful outcomes because they have all of these contributing thoughts and ideas. The same way a band has somebody who's contributing, number of people contributing to a song or adding a layer of music that they hadn't even thought of. We just create a new tapestry, and having that diversity and having that collaboration happening at the same time creates a tapestry that is untouchable. And it's just like magic when it happens, when we see organizations that are just in the flow because they're moving like think sports. When a sporting team is on fire, it isn't because they've got one hero. It's because everyone has learned how to pass the ball, and they're passing them in such a way that they're nailing the goal over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. One of my family's mottos is that teamwork makes the dream work, doesn't it?
Teamwork makes the dream work. Absolutely.
And just as an aside, Faith, you're not the only twin on this call. So I was also, I have the privilege of sharing my birthday with my identical twin brother. So
wonderful.
Yeah, Keith and I were born 3 months premature, and we were both born with cerebral palsy, but my brother grew out of his when we were 3 months old. So that's that's part of my story as well. So.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely, and I know you live out there in the Canadian West there. So tell me, what do you like most about living in Canada and out West specifically?
Well, what I love is that we have the ability to do this. We can talk about anything and we can talk about everything, and there's some freedom in that. And, that we live in a free country and we live with fresh air. And where I live, particularly, I'm in the North Okanagan, and I live so close to nature, and nature always makes me happy. And so I have walking trails just outside my door, ski hill 20 minutes from me, beachfront access in the summertime, cycling, and all these outdoor adventures that I get to live on a daily basis. I like to say that I get to live where people vacation, and there's just something really powerful about that. But fundamentally, we live in a free country, and as we look around the world, not everyone is as lucky. And so I'm eternally grateful for that.
Well, you have to value the fact that we live in a democracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And thanks. My final question for you has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
My personal and professional legacy. I want people to know, to always know that I lived with kindness. And I lived with generosity, and that I lived an honorable life, the one that my grandmother and my mother would be very, happy about. And, I live in a place of contribution above self. And when I connect with people, I want them to feel like they mattered. And so that is, the space that I like to occupy. I often get clients who've reached out a decade or more later after I've worked with them and said that some of the most meaningful time they spent was with me, that it really helped them understand who they were and where they were going in life. And that just speaks to me at such a high level. So to live with humility, to live with truth, to live with honesty and generosity of spirit, I think that is the legacy that I just want to leave behind.
Yeah, fabulous. And tell me, Faith, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, I'd love them to hit my website, so they can get me at imind.ca. So it stands for Inspiring Minds, but imind.ca. Or they can, if they're interested in any of the books that I've written, they can reach me at faithwood.ca. And I'm always happy to have a conversation, and I'm always happy to connect.
Well, I'm certainly happy that you found time to have this conversation phase from one Canadian to another. I'm always excited when I get to talk to people north of the border because I'm one myself, and I want to thank you for your good work in promoting the positive benefits of personal and human development. And I want to thank you for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me. And I hope when I'm out east, we'll have a chance to connect in person.
Absolutely. I always enjoy authentic human connection. It makes a difference, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sure does.
Well, I want to thank you for your time and for being here today.
Thank you.